I'm going to read from Psalm 139, and I'm going to read verses 7 to 12. Where shall I go from your spirit? Or where shall I flee from your presence? If I ascend to heaven, you are there. If I make my bed in Sheol, you are there. If I take the wings of the morning and dwell in the utmost parts of the sea, even there your hand shall lead me, and your right hand shall hold me. If I say, surely the darkness shall cover me, and the light about me be night, even the darkness is not dark to you. The night is bright as the day, for darkness is as light with you. For me, the most poignant and perhaps the most powerful words in the whole of the Bible were spoken by Jesus while he was being crucified. The Gospels tell us that during his execution, a deep, almost tangible darkness engulfed the whole area, and it did so for about 3 hours. And during those unnatural hours, Jesus cried out, my God, why have you forsaken me?" Abandoned by his own people, forsaken by his followers, disowned by Jew and Gentile, Jesus also felt that God himself had renounced him. He belonged to no one. He was desolate. And this is one of Jesus' greatest sufferings, the experience of absolute aloneness, of not belonging to anyone, an experience of total desolation. These words, of course, were first written by King David in Psalm 22. During a particularly difficult time in his life, he wondered whether God had disowned and abandoned him. In this psalm, however, in Psalm 139, we find David in a more positive place, reflecting on the impossibility of being rejected by God. I guess these two psalms put side by side have a lot to tell us about how what we know to be true doesn't always agree with what we feel to be true. Although David felt abandoned at times, he knew that God would never desert him. In the first part of Psalm 139, which I've dealt with in another talk, David reflects on how God knows everything about him. Here in the second part, in verses 7 to 12, David considers how God is always with him, wherever he may be. But we need to understand that David isn't making a point here about whether God is to be found in certain parts of the universe and not in others. That God is in every part of the universe is such an obvious point that it really isn't worth making it at all. What David is doing here is talking about belonging. Wherever he may be, God will always be faithful to him and own him as one of his. David will always belong to God. And now, to express this, David imagines going on the most epic of journeys. Within the limits of his ancient understanding of the universe, he imagines travelling to its very edges, from the highest reaches of the sky, which he calls heaven, to the depths of Sheol, which is the domain of the dead. He then imagines sprouting wings and accompanying the sun on its flight from its rising to its setting. Wherever he may be on this great odyssey, the authority of God in that place is such that he will always express his faithfulness to David. He will guide his life. He will hold him in his love. Now, Sheol, as I've said, is the domain of the dead. And what this psalm says about God being there is surprising, as Sheol is usually depicted within the Bible, but especially within the Psalms, as a place where God is not. But there is another surprise here in verses 11 and 12. Here David imagines absolute darkness descending around and on him. He's enveloped by this deep shadow. engulfed by this tsunami of nothingness. God is the God of light. He is the God of the "let there be light" command, a command that in itself created light. In him, we are told, there is no darkness at all. And yet, if light didn't exist in this world, if David was banished from the presence of light and abandoned to the darkness, even then, God would not lose him in the darkness. God would make his presence known to him through his unbroken faithfulness and goodness. God is there for him in the darkness. And this theme of God's faithfulness and loyalty to us throughout all our experiences is a fundamentally important one for all Christians. Having been utterly abandoned at Calvary, and by that abandonment having banished abandonment itself, Jesus echoed the words of this psalm after his resurrection as he sent his disciples in the world. He said, "All authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Go therefore and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all that I have commanded you. And behold, I am with you always, to the end of the age." And so the furthest reaches of the world are transformed by the lordship of Jesus, from being places that threaten isolation into being places of hope and mission. Even Sheol isn't excluded from this. Known now in the Greek New Testament world as Hades, it too is included in this hope that the lordship of Jesus gives. As Jesus said, "I will build my church, and the gates of Hades shall not prevail against it." Those who belong to Jesus will even plunder the domain of the dead because of Jesus' authority. They will defy death itself. And so as we go about our everyday lives, engaging with the world as those who belong to Jesus, ministering to the world in the ways that he has shown us, taking his good news into our communities, helping those in need, campaigning for justice for those who have none, empowering those who lack power, and bringing peace to broken relationships, Jesus is with us. We will encounter the extremes of human experience, and we will find ourselves in dark places. But let's not imagine for 1 second that Jesus won't be accompanying us into that darkness. Darkness is as light to him. Jesus is Lord, no matter what life may throw at us. It might be, of course, that the darkness is our own darkness, that we are not only engaging with extreme events, but we are experiencing them, and that we are being engulfed by the shadow of death. But even there, God is not absent. Even there, God's faithfulness will not simply be a distant memory. We may be tempted to gauge his goodness towards us, that is, by how pleasant our experiences are. But God's goodness doesn't depend on how we feel. It depends on Jesus. And Jesus is Lord, even over the darkness that we experience, no matter how dark it is. It is, after all, a darkness with which he is familiar, and one which he has overcome.